So we're back today to cover the god of war, Mars, in astrology and go through different houses and just see what Mars means, this great malefic when it's in a chart. Okay, so what are the significations of the second house? The second house primarily has to do with the kind of support that we receive in this life that sustains us. That's why it's related to family, because family supports us. It's related to practical knowledge that will sustain us through life. And some forms of practical knowledge is, well, how do you save money? How do you budget? How do you cook? These are practical knowledge that actually sustain your life. True friends are in this house. Your fixed assets are in this house. Your health is in this house. Your mouth and your voice is in this house. So when you get Mars here, Mars represents severing things, cutting things, destroying things. So on the negative end of the spectrum, Mars here can sabotage its own support system, for one. So if the second house are pillars that are holding up the structure of someone's support system, Mars can become cutting here, Mars can become breaking here and just break those things down. So it's not uncommon to see someone with Mars in the second house not being able to maintain friendships that last a lifetime, where those friends can come and be your support system. Or the person here fights too hard for certain people and it finds other people don't reciprocate to it, so therefore it becomes cutting. You can see these kinds of dynamics happen. Mars in the second house can actually give someone very sturdy health, like in terms of energy. You can think of someone who's stocky and muscular here in the second house. You put Mars here. And then on the negative side of the spectrum, Mars in the second house kind of teeter-totters in terms of, like, when it comes to loving cooperation to provide support, Mars becomes cutting because Mars doesn't have a neck for this itself. But when it comes to health and things of that nature, you can find, let's say, a bodybuilder. You can get an archetype of a bodybuilder with a Mars in the second house.
I always thought the first house was your physical constitution.
It is your physical constitution, but what is your physical constitution without nourishment and food, and without a sturdy kind of health? Because in the first house, you got your body and came into the world. That's why I'm saying there's a narrative in the houses from 1 to 12. In the second house, now someone needs to feed that body to sustain it, right? So the nutrition that you're getting is coming from the second house, not from if they just left you to your own vices in the first house when you're an infant, you die. But it's in the second house that your family's coming and giving you shelter, roof over your head, feeding you, listening to you, to your voice, picking up on your cues of your needs to give you the support that you need. Mars here, if Mars has some other malefic things happen in this house or getting malefic aspects, it could cut you from nourishment. So malnourishment could be indicated here. But on the other hand, if you have a Mars that's supportive, it's dignified, it's indicating that, like, sturdy, they were well fed. You could even take it so far as when they were babies, for example. You know how kids have temper tantrums when they don't get, like, the food that they want?
Not just kids.
That's just on Mars. Some parts of Mars never matured. But this is the second house. They're voicing it, right? Screaming like, I want that. You can go really deep with every house when there's a planet there to draw that picture of its archetype in terms of what kind of child it's indicating. What is it like when it does get the support? What is it like when it doesn't get the support? What kind of adult does it turn into? So these kinds of things can be seen from the second house.
Because it's sitting in the second house, and second house has to do with family assets and stuff, and Mars has to do with real estate. Could that be an indication of real estate family assets? Or
unless it is related somehow to the fourth ruler, or it has to be related to the second house. Doesn't mean properties. Second house is just the kind of fixed asset, the pillars that are in place that can sustain and support you throughout your life. But real estate and property is coming from fourth house. Yeah.
Okay, but Mars itself being kind of construction,
that would be more 10th house.
Okay.
The second house is literally everything after you're born in the first house. If you don't have these pillars of life like family, nourishment, if you're not endowed with a sturdy health, because that second house represents health, health upholds your being. So it's representing even the knowledge. The second house has a lot to do with knowledge, like financial knowledge, any kind of knowledge. You know how to fix things around the house. You know how to build things for the house. This kind of knowledge is coming from the second house. Yeah, so it's about the support you receive to sustain you. Mars here can sever the person from these pillars that they need to sustain themselves. And if Mars is very dignified, prominent, good aspects, Mars here becomes a go-getter who actually will complement some of these significations in the second house. Yeah, and in the second house, relative to the first house, has a passive connotation. And that's because when we take the first house, the second house, and the 12th house, the first house is blind to them. So as an infant, it takes us a very long time as human beings to understand and to appreciate how much went into us to survive as human beings. And as children, we just take it for granted. Even people as adults take it for granted how much of family effort has gone into us, regardless of what we might think of our family and our past. The very fact that we exist, a lot of support was invested there. And the first house is blind to the second house and second to the first house, but we must receive this in order to live and to survive in life. And when we grow up, we become the pillars for, let's say, our friends and our family. So it's also indicating in the latter part of life how we become the support system to other people, where in the former years is saying how our family support us. So based on your age, different houses start to signify different things. Also, the second house is one of them. Like the first house, I was saying the 7th house could be your partner and not necessarily you. The first house is initially what you get. The second house is later on what you're going to give.
And right across, looking at it,
the 8th house.
This should be exciting.
The 8th house. So the second house is how we receive from others. The 8th house is how do we take from. I definitely did not mean to give this a thumbs up. How we take from others. That's what the 8th house is about. 8th house is kind of strange though, because it has 3 different categories of meaning. And I was saying that in one of the last videos too. So I was saying in the second house, it has to do with practical knowledge that you can use every day to get what you want in life. You know, just I need this table gives me support to put my food. You just make it and you do that. The 8th house is about mysterious kind of knowledge. So mysterious things, secrets, the occult, astrology, all of these things go into the 8th house. So it is a kind of a knowledge, but it's exactly opposite of the second house. But yeah, so that house has to do with practical knowledge. The 8th house, the second house, practical knowledge. The 8th house, all the mysterious, unknown things that you can't access easily kind of knowledge. The second house, everyone lovingly are giving you support. In the 8th house, you're like, give me the support. Even things have to die out and get destroyed, unlike the second house that's constantly supporting and building in order to get something from the 8th. So inheritance comes into the 8th. Joint assets in terms of getting your partner's money comes in the 8th. Taxes, the government's literally taking your income. Like what's the fixed assets and the interest that you've made and the profit you made in the second house, the government's like taxes paid over. So they're taking it, right? And then the third set of significations in the 8th house, it has to do with reproduction, regenerative force, and one's life force. So in the second house, it has a similarity to the second house meanings, because the second house, some external factor is giving you, for example, nourishment to regenerate. But the 8th house regeneration is a little mysterious. Like when an egg and a sperm meets, 2 cells become 1, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16. And there's this exponential cell division till a human being's created. So there's something mysterious about that kind of a life force or that kind of regeneration that's happening in the 8th house. Like you can imagine the second house as a beautiful mansion on top of a hill, and on the mountain, on the skirts of the mountain, there are these beautiful homes sitting there. That's kind of like the second house. The 8th house is underground. You know, in Las Vegas, they have these tunnel systems, or in New York, the subways where people live and this, like, it's dark and it's hidden, right? The benefit of having Mars here with that kind of, let's say, mysterious knowledge, the occults, there's that initiative and the willpower to dig into the darkness and into the depth of things. There's the courage. Anyone who's gotten to the occult knowledge or astrology, they will know that the moment you tap into this, because you're dealing with some mystical or magical aspects of the world that's not scientifically verifiable and it's not something you can quantify, it can create a lot of anxiety. It can create a lot of, what if this happens? What if that happens? I don't want to know. Do you know what I mean? It can create a lot of angst, but Mars will give you that courage to just penetrate deep within and go in and at least trying to figure out what it is, because Mars is also adventurous. So it's like, what is this dark space? What are these mysterious things down there? When it comes to Mars, when it comes to the getting part of this house, look, inheritance, there's no shortage of stories of people getting inheritance where there's like a war within the family, right? Put Mars in the 8th house, the person's pretty triumphant. They're going to fight this war. That's what Mars likes to do. They might even start that war over inheritance in the 8th house. So Mars gets these kinds of significations in the 8th house. And as far as regenerative aspect of this house goes, for crying out loud, Mars is energy. Mars is inceptive, igniting, initiating. So it gives the person to regenerate. Like Saturn in the 8th house gives someone longevity. So they might even be sick, but the doctor gives them 6 months. Nonetheless, 30 years later, they have out-survived that time estimation. That's what Saturn in the 8th house does. But Mars in the 8th house can recuperate and regenerate quite fast. And this is the Doshanta houses. And we have to remember all the malefics do really well in 6th, 8th, and 12th. And Mars, especially its own natural sign of Scorpio, goes in the 8th house. So that tenacity that Mars has, it can deal with the 8th house issues. So a negative planet such as a malefic negative, a negative house as in a malefic house cancels out the negative and it becomes a positive thing in a sense that it doesn't create so much hardship for a person. Saturn here too. Mars does well here too. And this house has to do with charisma, for example, and sex and sexuality. And Mars can get a promiscuous slant in the 8th house, like charm you for one night and one night stand to get negative connotation. Do you know what I mean? And when we talk about like reproduction, regeneration, and life force, we are in a lot of ways talking about sex, and Mars has that passion, but it's more like a Netflix and chill and then never call you again type of thing, you know? These are the negative connotations of Mars.
Okay, just one before you move on. So all of these planets, when you're talking about the houses, even like let's just say they have Mars placed in some like 3rd or the 2nd, whatever, but it has a connection to the 8th.
Yeah.
Either by rulership or whatever.
Yeah.
These things can also take the 8th house narrative to apply to them.
So in one of the other videos, you were asking me about divorce.
Mm-hmm.
How's the ruler of the 7th and 8th connected is one of them. How's the ruler of 7 and 6 connected? It'll give you an indication of that. So yeah, wherever the ruler of that house is sitting says a lot about how that house is going to come and function and what kind of things it will have to grapple with or what will be included in its narrative.
Yeah, I was just wondering because like if as you go through the houses, like a lot of people just assume like, oh, my Mars is in the 1st or the 3rd or whatever, and that's the only thing that applies to them. But like you said in the beginning, when it's at the 1st, you're looking at the 7th, the 4th, the 10th, but then you also need to look where Mars, like Aries and Scorpio. So those also apply. Okay.
Yes, like for example, it's very good to have an exchange between the 6th and the 8th house. It makes you undefeatable in a lot of ways, and it makes you a fighter. You know how to overcome and you know how to negotiate and deal with the very difficult aspects of life where it's just unbearable for most of us, you know? And they're two malefic houses. And if they're doing an exchange with malefics in them, it's actually good. That life force that regenerates at some point in everyone's life, the 8th house becomes weaker with age too. There is no more regenerative power in the human. From the moment that we're born, we're actually dying. You know, it's like whatever that was invested in us bit by bit is being taken away. And then eventually, yeah, that eighth house cannot regenerate. So it's like at some point, this body will not be able to regenerate itself. So it dies, and then there's a transformation of that to whatever may be.
Okay, so even with somebody who has an exchange, like you were talking about 6 and 8 or
Yeah.
8 and 12 or any of these things, they are undefeatable up to a certain point, I
Of
guess.
course, yeah, we're human. That's the
Okay.
crappy
So
part about being mortal.
anyone out there who has this exchange, there
You're
will
not
be a time
immortal.
limit.
Yes, you're not
This-
immortal. And we gotta, even if you have like a malefic in a Doshanta malefic house, like the eighth house, it's still Mars. Mars is still gonna do crappy Mars things. Like, you have to know how far do you go into a secret before getting yourself to a point. Let's say, I don't know, let's say there's like a mobster and you're a journalist, you have a Mars in the eighth house, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go figure out all their business. You gotta mature that Mars to know at what point, how far do you dig, when. You think first, act later has to become your motto. Otherwise, you will get yourself killed. This
Oh,
is,
like in Narcos.
yes,
Oh
yes.
yeah, such a good show.
Yeah, so you gotta, I don't care where your Mars is sitting, how dignified it is. All of us human beings have to know how to harness this Martian energy invested within us, or we will harm ourselves. So we have to end the video here because I'm running short for time, but I'll pick this up. We'll pick this up in the next video, and we'll start at the third house. Maybe start at the tail end of the eighth and then move on to third and ninth axis. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good.
That's it for today. Much love. Till next time.